So, the trailer for Supergirl just dropped, and it looks like a lot of fun. Millie Alcock looks great as Kara. I love the little snippet we got of her in Superman, and I can already tell she's going to be fantastic here. The movie is going to be a direct adaptation of Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, the graphic novel written by Tom King with art by Bilquis Evely from 2021. The movie even had the same title until pretty recently. Superhero movies aren't really known for doing direct adaptations like this. With the exception of something like Watchmen or Invincible, comic book movies tend to be more in the business of taking inspiration as opposed to adapting a specific story one-to-one. And I wonder if Supergirl will take those same kinds of liberties or open the door for more direct comic adaptations in the future. The original graphic novel is incredible, so if this movie is anything like that, I think we're in for a good time. And I think that's all the news that happened this week. Yep, that's all I can think of. No other terrifying, earth-shattering events, and certainly nothing that would make me scared for the future of the entertainment industry as a whole. That was weird, what was that? Oh hey look, it's Lobo. Hell yeah, I love that guy. This video is sponsored by LabCorp On Demand. LabCorp On Demand is a way to purchase lab tests online without having to schedule a separate doctor's appointment first. I think that when it comes to your health and your body, knowledge and information is one of the most important things you can have. You can change your diet or your sleep or your habits and feel a difference, but are things actually improving internally or are you just guessing? Most people kind of just walk around based on vibes and how we're feeling, but having concrete information about your baseline can help you actually figure out what you need. LabCorp On Demand offers a men's health test that helps figure out exactly what it is your body's trying to tell you, along with over 100 other tests available. You can go to the link down below to purchase a test from LabCorp On Demand, then make an appointment or walk into one of LabCorp's 2,000 plus patient service centers for sample collection. No doctor's appointment necessary. Testing is performed at LabCorp's CAP-accredited, CLIA-certified clinical laboratories that typically process 3 million samples every week, and you'll be notified by email when your results are ready as early as the next day. Go to the link down below and use code TROYOBOYO to get 20% off select tests. Thanks to LabCorp On Demand for sponsoring this video. The trailer looks like a ton of fun. I really like the music that they picked with it, with Blondie and everything. It's very different from the original Superman teaser, which I think is interesting. That first trailer was much more like a slow build up, this sort of like emotional, dramatic thing, whereas this just looks like a really fun movie. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's a genuinely really good trailer for a movie that genuinely looks really good. I really like the newspaper that we see at the beginning where Superman gets this giant front page spread about him saving like a, what was it, like a nuclear reactor or something like that, which makes sense, you know, that deserves a big story. And then right in the corner, we see that Supergirl saved the cat. Who wrote those stories? If Clark wrote the big thing about himself, and then someone else wrote the tiny thing about Kara, that's fucked up. Millie specifically seems like so cool. She seems so, she's capturing this specific era of Supergirl, the sort of like, you know, the Tom King Woman of Tomorrow, like sad, drunk energy of her that I really like. That's not all that the character is by any means. I see people think that like Supergirl was like a terrible character before the Tom King book, which is not true. And say what you will about Tom King being kind of like the cornerstone of all comic creators in the movies right now. Not a fan of that personally. But regardless, I think that like, if you want to really differentiate not just Superman and Supergirl as characters, but also this version of Supergirl from, say, like Melissa Benoist's Supergirl or something like that, you know, like this is a really smart and interesting way to do it, you know? I see a lot of people saying that, like, Supergirl should never be like this. This is nothing like Supergirl. It's so out of character for her. And that she should be bright and hopeful and more like the CW Melissa Benoist version. And I really like that version of the character a lot. I really like Melissa Benoist. She's great in that role. The show was whatever, but I really liked her. And I think there's two sides to it, right? Because on one hand, that's how she is in this book. That's what they're adapting. That's what the storyline is. The character's not like that for the entire book. It's really kind of just like the first issue, but it's still a big part of what that story's doing. The entire point of the book is her dealing with her trauma and dealing with her kind of like PTSD over, you know, the death of her entire planet and the way she copes with that. And the way she copes with that in this story is getting drunk, is partying, is sort of like repressing that. And I think that's such a, it's part of what makes this book so good and what's so interesting about her. But that's also not to say that's the only time she's ever been interesting in her entire history. The Tom King, you know, the Woman of Tomorrow version of Wonder Woman, I said Wonder Woman. Tom King Wonder Woman. Oh, we're not going there. Keep Tom King away from Wonder Woman, please. The Tom King version of Supergirl with Woman of Tomorrow. It is a bit of a departure from how the character has been, you know, for the most part in her history. And some people like to say that she was boring and uninteresting before this comic came out. And this is the book that made her good. And I don't really think that that's fair, right? Like, I think it's kind of like unrealistic to say that the first time her stories have ever been good was 4 years ago. Like, come on. And so I think there are a lot of people who are like, oh, this is nothing like Supergirl, not my Supergirl, blah, blah, and they're really upset about this. The gotcha is always, oh, you didn't read the comic. Oh, this is the comic. You're showing you don't read this comic. And like, yeah, get them. That's so true. But also, they didn't like Melissa Benoist either when that was happening. Like, that show was considered too woke. Like, where was the support for that show then, you know? And I think if this version of Supergirl was more like that, where she was basically, not to discredit that version of Kara, because that was also a very good version of Kara, she was much more similar to Superman. I think more people would be like, oh, she's boring, she's a Mary Sue, this sucks. And it's just like, damn, there's no fucking winning here, right? So I'm not really putting like a ton of like weight to that kind of argument and that kind of that's sort of the narrative that's been going around lately, because people were saying the same thing about Tasha Kaya as Supergirl in The Flash. And speaking of Krypton, we see I don't want to get too much into the events of the book, but like we see a little snippet of that, which I think this will be very interesting to see how we take the revelations from, you know, the Superman movie with, you know, the elves and they're kind of maybe not being what we thought they were. And I wonder how much that applies to all of Krypton, if that applies to just the elves or what, right? There's that line, which is also a line from the book about like Krypton didn't die in a day, the gods aren't that kind. I've talked at length about this like numerous times, so I won't go too much into it anymore. And I like that we see a little bit more of it. I want to go in depth and actually explore this culture, you know, depending on how far they stray from the book, that might or might not happen. I made a joke about it earlier, but we also get our first look at Jason Momoa as Lobo, and Jesus Christ, he looks that's fucking Lobo right there. That's crazy. Momoa has always been like the perfect casting for Lobo. I've always liked that, and he seemed to always really want to play the character. He seems to really like the character, so I'm really excited to see what he brings here. It does feel just like kind of a little too easy, you know what I'm saying? I think it's more so that like I loved him as Aquaman. I thought he was phenomenal casting in that role, because it was very unorthodox. There's this interview that Momoa did when he was promoting, I think he was promoting Aquaman 2 when he was doing this, but basically he was talking about like how before Aquaman, he was kind of like typecast into this sort of bad guy role. So he was playing a lot of like either like barbarian characters or like bad guy characters and stuff like that. And he like never in a million years expected himself to be like a titular protagonist hero role. And so he was like caught off guard when Zack Snyder cast him as Aquaman. And I think he did a really good job in that, especially with how James Wan kind of turned that into this like almost like a race allegory of you have a Pacific Islander actor playing a traditionally white character surrounded by a bunch of white people who are telling him he's not allowed to exist in their culture and stuff. That came specifically from that casting that probably wouldn't have existed otherwise. It seems like Zack Snyder just wanted to cast him so he could keep playing the sort of like barbarian like Khal Drogo type character. So like, not gonna give Zach the full credit for that. I'm excited to see what he's gonna do with Lobo. He clearly loves this character, and he's gonna do a great job. Fuck, look at him. Oh my god, he looks crazy. He looks amazing. But just kind of like in the back of my heart, right? Just there's always gonna be a little piece of me that's like, man, I really liked him as Aquaman. I'm gonna miss it a little bit. I'm glad he's part of this moving forward still, at the very least. And it's interesting because Lobo is a character that's not in the original source material. Lobo's not in Women of Tomorrow at all. This is a completely new thing that they've added. I don't know if he is going to be the main villain here, because we do get a look at the main villain, Krem, from the comic. He's that sort of like leather couch looking dude. I don't know what you'd call that. He looks very different than he does in the source material, which is interesting. I wonder if that was just to make him distinct from Lobo, you know, because in the source material, he's just like a dude, you know? And we'll see if he's even in that same kind of role, you know? Because that's the thing that's hard about talking about this movie. Like I said, normally with these comic book movies, adaptations are very loose. Oh, we're pulling from Civil War. They don't pull from Civil War at all. Oh, we're pulling from Infinity Gauntlet. They don't fucking pull from Infinity Gauntlet whatsoever. Even something like Invincible, which is a direct adaptation, is still making these kind of grand sweeping changes to the point where like, I don't fucking know what's going to happen. But you know, they've already changed landmark things with a lot of the relationships and a lot of the people and characters and stuff, which is what's keeping that show fresh and making it feel modern and not like it's something from, you know, the early 2000s and stuff. And so I wonder if this will be more like that, but let's take the pieces and then kind of redraw it with other intent behind it. Or is this going to be like a novel to movie adaptation where like the beats are all the same and it's the same story for the most part, and then, you know, any changes made, ideally, not everything obviously, but like ideally the most amount of changes would be made to physically adapt the medium of book to movie. And so it makes my job so we're talking a little selfish. It makes my job as like someone who talks about this stuff. You'd think it'd make it easier, right? Because I'm like, oh, I know what happens. Oh, I know what happens in the book. I don't want to spoil it for anybody. I don't want to ruin this experience for anybody. I don't want to spoil the movie, and I don't want to spoil the book. You know, if you want to read this book, you should read the book. And I don't want to be like, okay, well, this character's this, so this is going to happen. This, you know, like usually when I do these trailer analysis videos or like any videos about an upcoming movie, I'm like, oh, I want this to happen. I wonder if this will happen. Or like, whereas with this movie, assuming that it is more or less a direct adaptation, we kind of already know what's happening, right? We kind of already know, like you just read the book, you know, and so I don't want to happen what happened with like Wicked, where like you watch the first part and you're like, oh cool, and then instantly you go online, everybody's already spoiled the second part because of the musical from 20 years ago, right? And yet technically the book has been around for, you know, almost 5 years at this point. Wicked, the musical, it's already been around for 20 years. But like, I feel like when you do an adaptation of it, that sort of resets the like spoiler timer, you know? And granted, like I said, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to be changed, you know? But I think the broad strokes are going to be the same. There's something that's going to happen at the beginning of this movie that like, I know it's going to happen, and it's not going to be fun, but I don't want to tell people that. It's hard enough talking about Invincible. If I mention that, like, oh, this character, and I mention them by name, and I say, oh, this character's really cool in Invincible, you're going to love this character, people will be like, why would you spoil it for me? Why would you ruin it? Like, I didn't spoil anything. I just said a guy's name, but like, you know, some people might still see that way. And so I think it's made talking about this movie really difficult, at least when it comes to like the story and the plot and the characters and all that stuff. I can still talk about like the design. I can still talk about like the direction and everything. And that's the stuff that's really interesting me here, because they are taking liberties here when it comes to the visuals of this story versus the comic. Because when it comes to the design of this movie, I see a lot of people like comparing it to the original book, right? And I see them being like, it's not colorful enough, or like it looks too much like Guardians of the Galaxy, which like, I see that. I especially see that with the colors. The colors in that book are phenomenal. Matthias Lopez did an incredible job. Oh my God, that book is gorgeous, in huge part because of him. And it's another example of colorists not getting enough credit in the comics industry. And so I think like for an adaptation of it, you would want it to be super bright, super colorful to kind of match that, right? And so I do kind of see that, but I also really like the kind of grungier, like almost dirty aesthetic of this. It is very Guardians of the Galaxy, which isn't a bad thing, I don't think. What is interesting is that this is gonna be the first time in the DCU we have a director that's not James Gunn. This is not James Gunn's project. This is Craig Gillespie's. And I'm a big fan of his work with stuff like I, Tonya, but then also Cruella. That movie had every possible reason to be like the worst like animated to live action slop. You know, that's that kind of thing that we get. And it turned out like really cool and really fun. It's a really good time, and I don't think it got enough credit when it came out. And it's a little bit Guardians of the Galaxy. That might just be the trailer, to be honest. Like we've seen so many movies trailers that are like, oh, this is too much like Guardians, and it's nothing like Guardians. Looking at you, original Suicide Squad. People are like, oh, James Gunn ripped off himself. James Gunn didn't make this movie. But I do think it's very interesting that the original source material, the comic, is very like, it's very fantasy, like that kind of aesthetic and that kind of feel. Whereas this is looking a lot more sci-fi with it, which is interesting. And I don't hate that. I think that that's a smart way to kind of let those two sort of differentiate themselves and coexist and stuff like that. You know, I like that. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't want this to be a replacement for the comic. I don't want people to do what they did with like Long Halloween, where like people watch the animated Long Halloween and they're like, oh, I read Long Halloween. I'm like, no, you didn't. That's not the same thing. You know, even the great direct adaptations of comics, you know, something like New Frontier, which is a phenomenal adaptation of an even more phenomenal book, it's still not the same experience. And I don't think you should ever replace reading the original material with, you know, watching someone adapt it, because there's always gonna be stuff lost in translation. There's always gonna be stuff added. Like, could you imagine being like, oh yeah, Percy Jackson, love Percy Jackson, I love those books, and you only watch the movie or you only watch the TV show? Like, they're different things, and that's what's fun about adaptations. That's what I love about adaptations. Even the quote unquote bad adaptations, I do still find an enjoyment in seeing the changes and seeing the decisions and seeing the reasoning behind them. Watchmen being a good example. I don't really like the Watchmen. I very much dislike the Watchmen movie. I don't think it shouldn't exist though. I do think that it could, you know, there's that's a can of worms. I'm not touching Watchmen, actually. Comics are this revolving door of creatives for generations, right? And I think people want to see like comics perfectly adapted into some other medium, either because they want the stories to be shown and given more of a spotlight directly as they are, or because they want an excuse to not read the comics, but that's a whole other thing. And people want the comic stories to kind of remain like pure and like exactly the same every single time. But like, I would much rather see that sort of revolving door of creativity and revolving door of intention also applied to the adaptations, right? I think it's what led to something like the Batman. The Batman is not a direct adaptation of anything. You know, you could say it's Long Halloween, you could say it's a little bit of Hush, not really, barely any Hush. Thematically, it's very much Batman Ego, and you could say it's year one with like how early he is, but there's nothing directly pulled from anywhere. And it allows for so much more interesting things, because like you look at like Penguin with Sophia Falcone. That is a really interesting take on the character that is very different from how she was in not really Long Halloween, but mostly Dark Victory, the next one. And that wouldn't be possible if we just directly adapted adaptations, right? And it adds so much more nuance and so many more layers to these characters and to these stories. And so at the end of the day, I'm not sure if I want this to become just the new thing for DC movies, where every movie is a direct adaptation of an existing story. Like, I wouldn't want to see a hypothetical Black Canary movie just be directly the exact same as her Tom King miniseries, or a Green Arrow movie be just adapting year one. Oh, and by the way, speaking of a Green Arrow movie, next week, baby. Next week. But that's not to say I'm completely against the idea of direct adaptations, not by any means. I think they're a great way to showcase specific storylines and creative teams to a wider audience, maybe even be a gateway into the larger world of comic books. The common adage you see all the time is that comics are too hard to get into because there are too many number ones, which I don't personally agree with, but adapting a single, easy to comprehend graphic novel skirts those issues altogether. Not to mention, some of the most famous and influential films of all time are adaptations of novels, so why should it be any different for comic books? And so when it comes to the Supergirl movie, who knows if it really is going to be a one-to-one one-to-one adaptation, or if it will take those kinds of sweeping liberties we always see. But what I can say is, based on everything we've seen so far, from Millie Alcock to Jason Momoa, director Craig Gillespie and writer Anna Nogueira, I think that this has a lot of potential to be something really special. But what do you think of the Supergirl trailer? And if you've read Woman of Tomorrow, what do you think they should change here? If you like this video, be sure to the like button and subscribe. Special thanks to Holly Poppy, BrendaX9213, Shin Mensiok, Godzilla Dreamer, ZBB Buddy, and Preston DeBattez for joining the spectacular families on my Patreon and channel members. I have a very, very big project coming up very soon that I'm really excited about, so make sure you don't miss that. This has been TroyBoy17. Be responsible, and I will see you around.